Hey there, welcome back to another video. This time around, it is my review of the 1985 fantasy film Legend. Now, Legend is honestly one of my favorite fantasy films. It's not quite in my top 5, but it would definitely be in my top 10. There's just something about it that is just so unique and wonderful, and it just is the most fairy tale-esque fantasy film that I think has honestly ever been made. There's a lot about it when it comes to its style, when it comes to its flair, that is just undeniably impressive. And yeah, it's flawed in terms of the story. There are some other things that I think definitely could have been improved upon. But man, it's just one of those movies that is just really special. It's one of a kind. There isn't another fantasy film like it because of the fact that you have a big, high profile director in Ridley Scott who is behind the camera. And it's just one of those movies that is just really in a category of its own when it comes to fantasy films. And I think that's what makes it an acquired taste, and I think that's what makes it a film that is divisive for some. But I think that's also another reason why this movie continues to endure and continues to have its own kind of legendary status after all these years. And before I get around to sharing more of my thoughts on Legend, I would like to give a special shout out to Mark for requesting this review. And if there's another film, TV show, or topic that you'd like to see me discuss in the future, feel free to donate to either my PayPal or to my Patreon. Link to both is in the video description down below, and I will try to get to your request as soon as I possibly can. Legend is directed by Ridley Scott, and this is a passion project of Ridley's. After he did a bunch of other stuff for different studios after he became a pretty uh, well-known name in the industry after Alien and Blade Runner. That's where he found this novelist named William Horchberg, and he saw that he had written some unrealized, unproduced screenplays, saw that he was a fantasy novelist, and he decided to ask him whether or not he wanted to work on the project. He agreed, and he and Ridley collaborated together to create ultimately what would become Legend. There were some things that were changed in terms of the original draft of the script. The original screenplay was a lot darker and had a lot more kinky, strange stuff in it, like Lily turning into a cat person and then being used as a sex slave. I'm not making that up. That's actually in the original script for Legend. And Ridley's direction in this, to me, it's right up there with some of his best work. This movie is absolutely stunning. The shots of the unicorns that were shot on location in an actual garden next to Pinewood Studios is breathtaking. Those sequences are easily the most breathtaking, mesmerizing shots of unicorns you will see in any movie. It honestly looked like it was capturing footage from an actual fantasy world. And there's a lot of scenes like that. The way that he shot the elaborate, massive set at Pinewood Studios at the 007 stage is nothing short of spectacular. He's also the reason why the set looks as massive and as unbelievable as it does, because he was the one that went on location, thought about shooting at in the redwood forests, but that was something that would be too expensive. So he's decided to take the concept of the tall giant redwoods and then build a set with like 60, like it was like 30-foot high or 60-foot high trees. It was insane. And it was a very elaborate, very intricate set. And the way that he shot it, it looked like it was the real deal. It looked like Ridley found a way to take himself and his cast and crew and transport them into another realm outside of our own. and the way that he shot the various different makeup effects sequences, especially the scenes involving darkness, was a genuine sight to behold. And yeah, just a great usage of camera techniques all throughout in terms of pan, zooms, tight shots, wide shots. Uh, he's a master. He really is. This is Ridley Scott in his prime. He was given a massive budget to work with too, which is like $25 million, which at the time was, I think, one of the more expensive films in the industry. So yeah, Legend to me is it really does stand out to this day as some of Ridley's best work as a director because of the sheer size of it, the scope of it, the difference in terms of how it stands out among all the other films in his filmography. He really never did another fantasy film, if you think about it. Like he did Kingdom of Heaven, but that's not a fantasy movie. So he never really did anything on the same plane as Legend, and his passion for it definitely does show as well because this is a passion project. This only got made because Ridley wanted it to get made, and he really was passionate about bringing this story to life and showing his movie making magic in a way that we honestly hadn't seen before and arguably have not seen since. Now, the screenplay by Hortzberg and an uncredited Ridley Scott because he helped with the writing as well. It's not quite as magical as Ridley's direction or other aspects of Legend. The story of Legend initially, Ridley, along with Hortzberg, they wanted to create a fairy tale that had more European sensibilities. So it was less Americanized. So a lot of the characters in Legend, including the heroes, were more complex characters. They had more flaws. For instance, Jack was unhealthily obsessed with Lily. He was just driven by lust and not necessarily by love. Lily was more selfish and was actually a real princess, and she was very selfish and vain. Uh, Even someone like Gump, he was really angry. And so there's a lot of things about these characters that were not really in tune with American sensibilities. So I think that's another reason why the test screening didn't go over too well, because people were like, wow, these characters are unlikable. And honestly, having seen the director's cut and having seen some of the other scenes, I could definitely understand why. I see what Ridley is trying to do, but with a fantasy, I think a more simple take on good and evil is the way to go. Having a lot of nuances with these characters and flaws, it just comes across as pretentious, especially in a movie that has like a 7 foot tall devil and unicorns. Like, I definitely prefer the less pretentious theatrical cut of the film when it comes to the story. And it's one of those things too where the main plot of Legend is very simple as well. So to just kind of convolute things and complicate things with this pretentious stuff, I just don't really feel is in the film's favor story wise. So because the story it's a tale as old as time. It's light versus dark. That's really what it is. You have Jack, who's a forest person. You know, he's a man of the forest. You could maybe argue he could be a wood elf or something, but doesn't necessarily show his pointy ears. But you get the gist. And Lily is this young woman who is in love with Jack, is in tune with nature, and is very innocent and naive. And Jack, because he's in love with Lily, decides to break a rule, which is to show her these sacred unicorns. She goes one step further and actually touches the unicorns, which is something that is forbidden for humans to do. And while this is all happening, Darkness has sent his men, these goblins, to take out the unicorn and cut off its horn so that they can uh, bring about the rise of darkness. Because as long as the unicorns are alive, darkness is not able to thrive. So darkness wants to take over the universe, and in order to do that, he has to find a way to kill the unicorns and take their horns. And because of the distraction that is provided by Lily, the goblins were able to take the horn off of one of the unicorns. And then later on in the story, they actually capture the other unicorn. That bit though, I'm like, okay, they killed the other unicorn and took off its horn pretty much immediately, but the second one they just capture and don't do the same thing. I guess I guess it's kind of explained as you have to do some kind of ceremony in order to kill the final unicorn, but that actually doesn't even seem like it's a proper explanation. It's just something that just happens later on. So I think that's definitely something that could have been handled better when it comes to the script. And Lily also gets captured along with that second unicorn and taken back to Darkness's lair. And because of that, Jack is now trying to find Lily, and he bands up with this group of other forest people, and they decide to try to stop darkness and save the universe and bring light back, and stop this cycle of uh, winter, eternal winter that has begun after the unicorn had its horn taken away. And you have a lot of this very grim fairy tale stuff throughout the script, but also a lot of elements that you would see in other fantasy films later on, like Willow, or even previously, like Kroll. And so there's lighter moments, like comic relief stuff with the gnomes or elves or whatever they are. And that got on my nerves, I have to be honest. So that's something I definitely feel could have been cut down or cut out of the film entirely, or maybe just left to like maybe one or two moments, because that was really irritating when it comes to Screwball and his other friends' antics throughout the movie. And even the goblins were kind of annoying too, Blix and so on, because of their shenanigans. You've got Tim Curry's Darkness, who is intimidating as all hell and is this larger than life, massive demonic figure. And you've got gnomes doing fart jokes and goblins doing all this other stuff. And it's just, it's jarring, I have to be honest, tone wise. Also, Jack, he's not that. He's not that memorable or strong of a hero. Like, he even starts out as the kind of guy who's a reluctant hero, like, oh, I'm no warrior, and then just suddenly is able to learn how to fight with a sword for the convenience of the film's plot when he's fighting darkness at the end. Because otherwise, he's a complete and utter a useless warrior. Like he's no warrior at all. Like, he's wearing the armor, he's got the shield, he's got the sword, but he's just spending most of the time jumping away from people. And I guess that does create a bit of a different dynamic for the character that is a little interesting. But in the theatrical cut, for instance, the confrontation with Meg Mucklebones at the swamp, it's very abrupt, and it just seems like, oh, he's facing off against this witch monster and then takes it out way too easily. Well, in the European cut, I believe, and also in the director's cut, there's more to that scene, but the battle still isn't really much. Like, that's one thing about Legend that I think is lacking, is definitely the action in it, especially in comparison to films like Krull or Willow, especially Willow. And so that's one thing that kind of falls a bit flat with Legend is the action scenes, I have to be honest. Oh, there's this creepy witch in a swamp, and it doesn't matter what version you watch. You can watch the extended version, the director's cut, and you get more of Jack using his smarts to distract the witch by making her think that she's beautiful, and then look at her reflection in the shield, and then he takes her out, but it's still just a one-hit kill if I remember correctly. Um, Even the confrontation with the Darkness's cannibal guards is also pretty brief, and Jack takes them out by pouring hot boiling water on one of them. And even the fight with Darkness, like, it starts out really strong with Darkness throwing Jack around like a rag doll and shooting flames at him, and Jack gets in a few shots with the sword, and Darkness has got the sword, but Darkness is just a superior fighter. And then Jack gets the unicorn horn and then stabs Darkness, and then Darkness is getting I'm trying to remember, overwhelmed. He's getting overwhelmed by all the sunlight because of the trick that Jack came up with to reflect the sunlight with all these giant dinner plates. And then you have these different, I think it was a Gump or Una, they're like, "Hey, finish him, Jack. Defeat darkness once and for all." And he just, I guess, cuts off his arm, I think, with the sword, and then he falls into the cosmos and disintegrates. And I'm like, that's not a very satisfying demise for darkness. Like, it isn't even something that really seems like it's that well thought out, and it definitely wasn't well executed. It seems kind of clunky. Like, the dialogue is great from Darkness, and that's another thing about the script I do want to give praise for is the dialogue. There's a lot of great lines in this, especially from Darkness, and that is something that elevates the script to me above average at the very least, is the strength of the dialogue and just the strength of certain scenes, like the scene with Lily when she's being manipulated and is enticed by darkness, and there's that whole dance scene, and then where there's this mysterious figure in this black dress with this mask on that's covering her face, and she's dancing and twirling, and she starts dancing with Lily, and then they do this dance, and then uh they become one, and now Lily is the one in the dress and dancing. Like, I thought that was a really great scene. That was really well done. Any scene with Lily and Darkness, if I could speak. My apologies for my mumble mouth there. Is a rather good, especially when it comes to her resisting the advances and the urges of darkness, and then ultimately succumbing to them. So you think, so that she can pull off this trick and be the one to manipulate darkness this time around, because she says, "Okay, I will be with you on one condition: if I get to kill the last unicorn." And of course, it's a setup so she can save the last unicorn and set it free. The love story between Lily and Jack is fine. It's not anything remarkable, but it works for what the story is trying to do. But a lot of the stuff that's more interesting and a lot more memorable about Legend is the stuff involving darkness. Any scene with him, any scene with his minions, minus the goblins, because I just found they were annoying. But like the opening of the movie, where you see what definitely looks like a hellish landscape. It looks like it it's straight from the pits of hell, and there's like a guy who's alive strapped to a table getting cut up by these massive monsters with giant axes, and the guy's screaming in pain, and there's fire everywhere. You're like, and then you see darkness, and you're like, oh wow, okay, all right, I'm definitely in for something, something different when it comes to your typical sort of fantasy film. And I like that contrast. I like how it starts out with darkness, and this is in the theatrical cut because in the other versions, darkness you don't see his face until an hour and 3 minutes into the movie, which I don't really care for. I like the way that it starts out showing you darkness early on and having that contrast of darkness in his realm versus the beautiful gardens and the wonderful landscapes and the birds and the flowers of Lily's world. I like that contrast that opens up this film. I think it's a nice, stark and pretty scintillating way to open up the story and the movie overall. But yeah, a lot of the more mysterious aspects of the script are the more engaging and interesting aspects of it, like the stuff with Una and how she's making a deal with Jack. She can do all these different things because she's a fairy, but she's basically trying to get Jack to keep a secret, and she'll do things for him if he asks, but she doesn't want to make it like into some big deal. But now they're captured and they're trapped in Darkness's lair, and so Una's the only one that can do anything to get the keys so they can get out of this jail. And so her secret is out. She's mad. She tries to still make a deal with Jack by asking him for a kiss. And she becomes very adamant and upset at him because he doesn't really kiss her on the lips or anything. And so she tries to trick him by changing herself into Lily, but Jack refuses her advances, and she's just petulant and upset about it. And I actually don't mind that. That's a different take on what you normally see with these fairy type of characters. And I think a little bit of that different dynamic with some of these characters in terms of their less than ideal characteristics. I think that works for Legend, but too much of that, especially when it comes to your heroes, to your main characters that are on the side of light, that makes them not too much different from the side of dark. So I definitely feel that a little bit goes a long way when it comes to that kind of stuff involving the characters. So the characters kind of a mixed bag, and when it comes to the characterization in terms of the writing, the dialogue for the most part is pretty strong. Some nice poetic usage of words, and there's I don't know if limerick is the right word, but there's a lot of that kind of stuff in the dialogue. Definitely has its own unique sort of language to it. And yeah, I think the whole premise of light versus dark, the way that it utilizes unicorns, a lot of that is rather well done, well structured. Um, and overall, I think it's a good script. I don't think it's a great screenplay, though. I don't think it's the greatest cast ever, but it has some really strong standout performers. Mainly Tim Curry. Like, Tim Curry is just tremendous as Darkness. Like, this is one of my favorite roles of his, and it's a testament to his strength and his overall talent as an actor, because he is underneath all these different pounds of makeup, and he has to emote and bring this character to life, and this is a pretty imposing figure, and he manages to actually do that. It's an intimidating presence. Tim Curry is actually intimidating as Darkness, but he also has that playfulness, and he has that just twisted fun that Tim tends to lend to a lot of his roles. And you could just tell that he was enjoying the challenge, despite how just uncomfortable and genuinely difficult it was for him to do that role. He was struggling with claustrophobia because he was in that suit all the time. And he actually wound up hurting himself because he was so freaked out with the claustrophobia. One time he tried to rip off the makeup, and he actually ended up ripping off his skin in the process. And so they had to make the makeup a little bit less difficult, and they had to work around his injury. And he was such a trooper, man. Like, he dealt with the claustrophobia, and he dealt with the pain of ripping his skin off, and still delivered, in my opinion, one of his most memorable performances as Darkness. Tom Cruise is okay as Jack. Part of me does think it would have been interesting to see what Johnny Depp would have done with the role as Jack. He was initially considered heavily to play the role, but then they decided to go with Tom Cruise because I think he was a bigger star at the time. I know Robert Downey Jr. and Jim Carrey were also considered to play Jack at one point, and I really don't know about that. I do not think that would have worked out. Especially not Jim Carrey. Can you imagine Jim Carrey in Legend? Like, come on. Maybe as one of the goblins, maybe as one of the side characters, but not as the hero or the warrior, the figure, the guy who is supposed to go up against Tim Curry's Darkness. There isn't much to Jack as a character, so a lot of Jack is very a visual focus in terms of his looks. And Tom definitely had that kind of elven forest creature sort of look to him at the time, especially with the long hair. But I would say this is definitely one of his weaker performances when it comes to him as an actor. But this is also pretty early in his career, so he was still trying to figure out things when it comes to his acting. But I mean, there's only so much he can do with lines where he's talking about gnomes like screwball and so on and so forth. And it's almost seemed like half his dialogue was him just going, Lily, Lily, like, but he was good when it comes to the physical stuff. Um, when the film demanded that kind of stuff, where he's jumping around and leaping and rolling and doing all that sort of physical activity when it comes to the character being involved in combat. Mia Sara and her, I think it's her film debut, was Lily. She's fine too. She's beautiful. The costume designers and everybody. That's another thing that is really great about Legend. Um, but you could tell this is her first film. I think Jennifer Connelly was considered at one point, but decided against it. Would have been interesting to see what she would have brought to the role, but Mia Sara still was good, uh, but not great. There's a couple lines from her that are a bit stiff. David Bennett as Gump, I liked his performance as the elf, but a lot of the personality and charm when it comes to that performance is brought to the table by Alice Playten, who played Blix, the leader of Darkness's goblins. You got Billy Barty, Screwball. It's basically the same character he's played in. It plays in everything. Plays this little person comic relief, and I always find him to be annoying. I think he played Gwildor in Masters of the Universe too, and he was also bad in that. Cork Hubbert is Brown Tom. Peter O'Farrell is Pox. You've got Kieran Shaw's Blunder. Robert Picardo is Meg Mucklebones. Surprisingly, he's completely unrecognizable under all that makeup, but he's still. If you know it's Robert, you can tell if you're familiar with his mannerisms and everything that he brings to the table. But it was a lot of fun to see him play that role. I wish that character was in it more. And Annabelle Lanyon is Una. I want to mention her because she looks like a actual fairy from a fairy tale. Like the makeup they did for her, her icy cold blue eyes, the way that she played the role was very um, strange and out there, and I really liked her performance in it. That's another character I honestly wish was in the film more. But not the best cast in the world, but definitely not a bad cast for what they were trying to do. Now, I do think it has some great cinematography though by Alex Thompson, as well as great editing by Terry Rawlings. So the technical aspects of the film are really nice, as well as like the production and art design. I mean, the production and art design in this is it is genuinely fantastic. It's a damn shame that Ridley wasn't able to complete all of the shooting that he wanted to do in that elaborate forest set, though, because it actually burned down, and they had to suspend filming for at least I think it was at least like a couple weeks, maybe a month, because they only had 10 days left to shoot in that set, and then it burned down. The flames were at one point 100 feet high, so they had to improvise and shoot on hastily built sets that weren't anywhere near as good looking, and shoot the underwater scenes and actually in a real river or lake over in, I believe, somewhere in Florida, I think. And apparently, like the lake that or river that Tom Cruise was swimming in actually had like alligators in it. So had to swim in alligator infested waters to get the underwater shots, and had to do some other stuff in different sound stages in order to accomplish the other sequences. The editing by Terry Rawlings really needed to be top notch because the theatrical version cut a lot out. So you need to make things look, for the most part, pretty seamless. And I think, other than a weird cut in the Meg Bucklebone scene, I think he managed to accomplish that. The editing, in particular, in the scene when you first see Darkness reveal himself to Lily as he's walking through that door. Uh, that is some absolutely excellent editing. And I love that sequence. I love everything about that scene. That reveal is like one of my favorite reveals for any villain in anything. It's epic. It's beyond epic. And it's really that way in large part due to not just how Ridley shot that scene, but also how it was edited by Terry Rawlings. And the score is also one of the more interesting things about Legend, because there's two different scores for Legend. Just like there's three different versions of Legend, when it comes to different cuts of the film, there's two different scores. So the original score for Legend was done by Jerry Goldsmith, who I am a massive fan of. He is my favorite composer of all time when it comes to film composers. I love his work. I'm not a big fan of his Legend score. I never have been. I think it's honestly one of his weaker scores. It just doesn't really work as well with the visuals as Tangerine Dream's score does for the theatrical version of Legend. It definitely looks like something that is completely out of our realm and out of our reality. And Tangerine Dream's score fits that vibe and that overall tone a lot better than what Jerry Goldsmith did. So that's why I prefer Tangerine Dream's score, because I just feel it's a better fit for Legend. Because the Jerry Goldsmith cut at points is just way too obnoxious, especially with the Goblin theme. And it's also not anywhere near as good when it comes to some key sequences in the film. The dance scene with Lily, where she's dancing with temptation. The Tangerine Dream score, which sounds like some kind of twisted music box, that is a much more memorable, much more iconic, much more immersive and interesting and intriguing score for that particular sequence. Jerry Goldsmith's score is technically well done. It's not necessarily badly done. It just is kind of plain and ordinary. And I like the song that they use for the ending. Yeah, the Tangerine Dream instrumental, Love by the Sun. I like the one with John Anderson's vocals. And I love Brian Ferry's song, Is Your Love Strong Enough, which is at the end credits of the theatrical cut. So yeah, the original songs that they did for the soundtrack, I also like a lot. And I can't talk about Legend though without mentioning the makeup effects. Like the makeup effects in Legend are legendary by Rob Bottin and company. Like it definitely is some of the finest work that Rob has ever done, especially when it comes to the darkness makeup. That is still some of the most mind blowing makeup effects that I've honestly ever seen in a movie. Yeah, Legend is one of those films that I think it's well deserving of its cult status, but I can see why some people aren't really big on it because it is very much style over substance. There's not a lot to the script, there's not a lot to the story. Yeah, there are other versions of it that are a little bit more complex in terms of the narrative, but the story is still rather simple. It's a story about light versus dark. And I think if you get immersed in the visuals and the style and the music, I think it's something that definitely will pay off for you in the end. But if it's just something that just feels like it's just a bunch of aesthetics and you're not really able to connect with it beyond that, I can see why it's a movie that just doesn't really resonate with you that much. But I've always liked it. I've always liked it since I first saw it, and I just I just think it's just a really unique movie overall, especially when it comes to the fantasy genre. Um, but anyway, thanks for watching my review of Legend, and until next time, I'll see you later. See ya.